You've arrived at my review for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, a film sequel 13 years in the making. Since the first film, the Sawyer family have left the south of Texas and moved up to the Dallas area, where they continue to kill and terrorize anyone who gets in their way, which in this film is a couple of local radio station DJs. But hot on their trail is a tough, uncompromising cop known as Lefty. Now, supposedly, director Tobe Hooper, after the release of the first film, was a little bit bemused that nobody really picked up on all the black comedy in the film. So when it came to the second one, he decided to just go out and make a complete black comedy horror film. As much as I think he's a genius, though, for giving us that first Texas Chainsaw and a bunch of other good films, I'm not sure that mine and his sense of humour is really on the same wavelength. I mean, I've seen the first film many times, and I can't think of much that's funny about it, unless you count the sight of Franklin going down that slope at the beginning of the film in his wheelchair. And again, in the second film, the only genuinely funny scene I can think of is Lefty in the chainsaw shop. The trouble with trying to make a sequel to Texas Chainsaw is that there's just no story left. Once you allow Sally Hardesty to escape at the end of the first film, then there's no way that the Sawyers could credibly remain in their farmhouse. I'm not buying what the narrator says at the start of the second one, that the police couldn't find that farmhouse. Texas might look sparse on a film, but it's not the Sahara Desert. 4 kids missing, the police would have been all over that place within an hour. In my opinion, the only way you could have made a serious sequel, really, is to turn it into a sort of Devil's Rejects affair with the remaining Sawyer family members on the run. Maybe you could have squeezed another film out that way. What I wasn't expecting is for it to turn out that they own what's basically a James Bond lair across the other side of the state in the form of this abandoned amusement park. I mean, it's implied in the first film that the main reason they turn to cannibalism is because of a lack of employment opportunities over the years, and people have been laid off at the slaughterhouse. That's what made the first film extra scary, that it's society's failings almost that's led them down this dark path. They're not just being freaky for freaky's sake. But if they own real estate other than the farmhouse, then their poverty doesn't really make sense. Unless they're just squatting at the abandoned amusement park. But that begs the question of, how did they find it in the first place? And secondly, why has nobody come to claim it in the intervening 13 years? It's a stretch. Maybe that's why Tobe Hooper named one of the characters Stretch, because he knew deep down that the whole story was a stretch too far. Another thing I take umbrage with is the portrayal of the Sawyer family. If we start with Leatherface, I mean, well, it's a different guy behind the mask for a start. Gunnar Hansen, who played the role the first time around, couldn't be lured back. They basically offered him derisory terms with each passing sequel from this point forward, so he never returned. So it's a different guy, and it feels like a completely different character. I mean, Gon is the terrifying villain from the first film who would kill people on sight, whether they were male or female. But in this film, his own family can't even persuade him to kill people. And it's implied that he's falling in love with Stretch. And he comes out with all these weird feminist mannerisms that he wasn't doing in the first film. He genuinely seems like a different guy. Will the real Leatherface please stand up? Because he's not in this movie, I swear. Chop Top, played by Bill Moseley. So because the hitchhiker character dies at the end of the first film, it sort of leaves a hole in the Sawyer family dynamic from a viewing perspective, or so Tobe Hooper seems to feel. So he throws in the Hitchhiker Part 2, a character who's the same as the guy who's just died. Where he comes from, I don't know. He's annoying as hell. In the radio station segment, he's not too bad. He comes out with a couple of funny lines like, "Dog will hunt," and incoming mail, incoming mail. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't amused with some of that stuff. If he'd have died at the end of that part, maybe I wouldn't look back on his role in the movie with such distaste. But by the time we get to the amusement park, he's just completely insufferable. I mean, the last half an hour of the film is almost unwatchable for me because of Chop Top, and especially when he's paired with Drayton, a character who was not bad in the first movie, but in this film he's just on screen way too much, and he becomes annoying as well. I mean, I just get tired of watching him berate Leatherface and Chop Top, and he's kicking them up the bum as if he's in some kind of pantomime. You know who else is annoying? The 2 jerks at the start of this film who are driving down the highway, who end up kicking this whole story off. I mean, what a pair of idiots to put in a movie. I mean, one of them's got these daft glasses on. They're just hyperactive. They're bouncing around this car. They're ringing up Stretch at the radio station, being total arseholes. I mean, honestly, I hated these characters. I really did. The protagonists are better. I mean, Dennis Hopper is very watchable as Lefty for the most part. There's this scene that doesn't make any sense where he doesn't believe Stretch when she says she has a cassette tape with evidence on it, which is weird because in the previous scene he'd been telling these deputies he was going to leave no stone unturned in his pursuit of the chainsaw killers. And also towards the end of the film, I kind of feel like Lefty gets a little bit too crazed. But yeah, he's okay compared to the Sawyers. He's definitely okay. But the highlight of the film from an acting and character standpoint is Caroline Williams as Stretch. I mean, she's almost as good as Marilyn Burns' Sally Hardesty from the first film. She really puts her back into it in the second half of the film. She's very, very good, actually. Was there anything I liked about the film? I guess Stretch's relationship / friendship with LG was quite cute. In fact, LG's death scene was the best scene in the film, actually. It feels like a scene from a different movie entirely, a more serious movie. And it's quite emotional watching Stretch have to observe her friend dying with all those nasty wounds while she's being forced to wear his face on top of her face and she can't take it off because her hands are bound. That was a cleverly written scene, but it's slim pickings elsewhere. I thought the set dressing in the amusement park was quite detailed and well done. And Stretch's little dance at the end of the chainsaw was a neat little piss take, I guess, of Leatherface's dance at the end of the first movie, but it's very thin on the whole. There's not much for me to enjoy in this, and it's so disappointing, it has to be said, when a masterpiece film like the first one is followed up with a mess like this, where the tone's just completely off, the comedy doesn't land often enough, the characters are just annoying, there's plot holes everywhere. I don't get why the Sawyer family are obsessed with getting that cassette tape back, because there's nothing on it, surely, apart from the sound of a chainsaw going zzz. I mean, they're not going to get convicted in a court of law over that. There's no judge in the world who's going to sit there and go, oh, that definitely sounds like a Sawyer chainsaw if ever I heard one. I sentenced them to 100 years in a state penitentiary. No, I don't think that's happening. A defence lawyer would have a field day. What's going on with the grenade as well? Does it kill anybody? We don't find out because it's so badly filmed. We just cut away to the chase between Chop Top and Stretch. I forgot to mention the granddad earlier. So in the first film, there's this great scene where Sally Hardesty's tied to a chair and they wheel out this granddad character. It looks about 100, but somehow he's managed to sustain himself by sucking the blood off people's fingers. But that was such a weird, wacky thing that I could believe once, okay? The next logical step for that character would have been for the Sawyers to wheel him out again in a sequel, but this time he's dead and he's got like maggots where his eyeballs used to be, but they're still talking to him because they're just crazed lunatics. But don't bring him back a second time alive. I mean, so what? Did they take him across state in that condition? And then he survived another 13 years, and now he somehow looks even younger than he did in the first film, as if he's been putting oil of Ulay on all that time. It's just, no. And why are we doing the same dinner scene again, repeated almost ad nauseum? I mean, it's literally just completely the same as it was in the first film. It's not going to be as effective the second time round. You know you're in a creative mire when you do that. You really do. You might say, I don't get this film. You're right, I don't get it. I've seen it 3 times now across my entire life, and I don't think I'm ever going to enjoy it any better than I currently do. So let's get to the bag of terror and find out what dismal score we've got today. We have just 1.5 bloody axes out of 5 for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. That is a massive drop-off from the 5 bloody axes that the original Texas Chainsaw got. A bigger drop-off, in fact, as the one that Chop Top takes at the end of this movie. Right, I'll be back next time for the 3rd film in the franchise. See you again, bye-bye.